Good afternoon. Welcome to Belmont Synagogue. My name is Rabbi Mark Levine, and it is my great privilege to be the rabbi of our wonderful community. But today, the United Synagogue have asked me to share with you, with us, some Divrei Torah, some insights into the weekly Parasha. And we are not in shul on Shabbat. Our synagogue has closed for the time being, I assume, like many of yours. So we don't have the opportunity to sit in shul and to hear the beautiful sounds of the Torah, but we can still learn it. We can still open the books and try and understand these beautiful texts. And these, at the moment, we're at Parasha Vaera this week. These are stories that are so familiar to us. Yes, we read Torah every single year. We know Moses and Aaron and these amazing stories. We have the Haggadah on Pesach. On Seder night, we sit there and tell our children, tell our friends and families the wonderful, incredible story from exile to redemption, from servitude to freedom. But underneath the simplicity of the story lies such richness and such beauty. We can come back year on year and year and unpick open the treasure trove of life lessons, of insights, inspiration. And what I want to do today with you, with together, with your permission, is to pick apart one small section of this story, but not necessarily as a story, but understanding its purpose and the themes and everything that's going on, and really try and open our eyes and hopefully what this will do will encourage all of us to keep looking, to keep searching, because we're only going to start the process. We've only got a short amount of time today. We're only going to start the process. But what I really want to do is start to look at the story of the plagues. Everything is set up and ready to go. Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the Israelites, after hundreds of years in slavery and the persecution of the Egyptians, they are ready to leave Egypt. They are begging to leave Egypt. The leaders have been appointed. Moshe and Aaron will be the ones that will go to Paro, go to Pharaoh, in order to push him, to encourage him, to appeal to his Rahmanas, his mercy, to let Bnei Yisrael go. And we know that things aren't so simple, as we'll see. Let my people go. No. He doesn't. Threats of the power of the Almighty, that he will bring these makot, these plagues upon Egypt, do not work. There is no effect. So we have 10 plagues. And even just by background, before we get into some of the texts, and we'll learn some of the texts, we'll look at them together. Just for background information, just so we can really set this up. 10 plagues, and we know the 10 plagues. Dam, Tzefadeh, I'm not going to sing the song now. Blood and frogs, etc., etc., etc. They come up several times. So we'll look at that in a second. But as I say, just in terms of some background questions, and you find when you ask one question, you think of about 10 other questions. But why were there 10 plagues? And this isn't going to be the focus of our shiur today. Why 10 plagues? And simply put, the answer is because God could have taken Egypt. God could have taken the Jewish people out of Egypt. He could have just done one thing. He could have just picked them up and taken them, or just afflicted them once, put one bad thing on Egypt, give them darkness, or just give them blood. And he could have made it all happen that way. He could have made it so severe and so bad and so painful. If that's what God would have wanted to happen, it could have been done like that. But yet, there are 10 plagues. It's clearly a process. And not only that, if we want to suggest, as some of the Mefarshim, some of our commentators suggest, that the whole point of the 10 plagues was to punish the Mitzrayim, to punish the Egyptians because of how they treated Bnei Yisrael. I could argue with them and say, well, listen, when does the Pesach story really start? When does the Egypt story really start? Someone to suggest at the end of the book of Bereshit, where Jacob brings down his family and they settle in Egypt. Some want to suggest go back a little further. We've got Joseph, who was sold as a slave to Egypt. That's where it begins. Others want to suggest it happens all the way back at the beginning, Parashat Lech Lecha, when God makes a covenant with Abraham. He makes a connection, a bris with Abraham, and he promises Abraham that your seeds, the generations that will follow you, will end up in a foreign land and they will be enslaved. And I, says God, will bring them out of that slavery, of servitude, with an outstretched arm, with a mighty hand. I will redeem them, and I will take them to receive Torah, and I will bring them to the land of Israel. So really, Pesach starts much earlier. And if already it's preordained, and if the Mitzrayim, if the Egyptians were going to be persecuting Israel, and God had set that up to happen, how is it we could punish them in such a way? They were doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were the taskmasters. That was their role. So why all this punishment? Why, if that's the reason, why punishment? And there are those that want to suggest, again, not our topic today, there are those that want to suggest maybe it had something to do with the fact that, they were supposed to be persecuting, but did they have to be so enthusiastic? Did they have to enjoy it as much as they did? Did they have to be so creative in everything that they did? And again, not our topic today. But going forward, 10 plagues. Why 10? Why Dafka 10? So that's something that already we can start to try and look at. What was the purpose of the plagues? And also, let us not forget that another reason, and the Pasukim, the Parasha, the words, the text tells us that these plagues will be signs, they will be wonders, that not just the Egyptians will feel the power and the strength of the Almighty, but for generation after generation, there will be an imprint on the land of Egypt for those people, for the nations of the world, but also for the Jewish nation, that you will remember that this is God, the Almighty, that did these actions, that you did not leave of your own accord, you left because it was the will and power and strength of God, our Creator, the Almighty in heaven. But now that's the backgrounds. What's going on? Why 10 plagues? Why these specific plagues? Now we're going to start unpicking. Again, we're not going to answer. We could spend hours and hours on this. But just to focus us somewhat. And what I would like to present or suggest is that each plague served two purposes. Number one, as we suggested, is punishment. Oppression was, the Jewish people were oppressed. They were made to work under the worst conditions, and they were persecuted. So for that, the people needed to be punished. That's reason number one. But the second reason for the plagues could be, let us suggest, that each one was there to teach Bnei Yisrael, to teach the world something important about God, about life, and about our Avodat Hashem, about how we view the world. What am I talking about? How are we going to explain this? Let us take the very beginning of the story of the plagues, unpick it a little bit, and hopefully it should all become clear what I'm getting at. The punishment side, what actually happened, how the Egyptians felt, but why these plagues in this order. And again, we're not going to have time to do everything today, but just going to start the story, and hopefully it will all begin to make sense. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see this and join with me. Just bear with me a second. Let's just zoom a little bit. There we go. We can see it. So if I was to ask you where the plagues are found, hopefully you'll tell me, yes, they start in Parasha's Vaera, our Parasha this week. And a little trick, just in case you don't know this one already, how many are in Parasha's Vaera and how many are in next week's Parasha, Parashat Bo? So the answer is, and you'll never forget this once you remember this once, there are 7 in Parasha's Vaera, and there are 3 in Parasha's Bo. How do you remember that? Because the gematria, the numerical value of the word Bo, a bet and an aleph, is 3. So how many plagues are in Bo? 3. The last 3, and the first 7 are here in our Parasha's Vaera. Now, the plagues listed as they are come up in 2 other places in Tanakh. Obviously in Torah, but they come up twice, I think it's only twice, in Tehillim. We're looking now at the first, well, actually this is the second, but we're going to go here first for a particular reason. And I want to just show you very briefly, again, we're focusing on dam, blood, and tzvadeh, which is the frogs, just to understand what I'm talking about. But let's look at the differences, or let's try and understand how it's presented at least. Sholach Moshe Avdoi. Moses, the servant of God, was sent, Aaron, Asher B'charbo, with Aaron, they were the chosen ones. In verse Chaf Zayin, in verse 27, Smoivam, Divrei Aisaisav Umoifsim Be'eretz Cham. They performed, or they would be the agents that would perform, Divrei oisoi sav, and wonders. These signs, these miraculous, these wonders, these signs is important, but these wonders, these miracles, obviously referring to the plagues. Sholach choshech v'yachshich v'lomar es davarei. So what comes first? If I was to ask you, what are these signs? Blood, right? No. Apparently, choshech, here as it is presented here in this psalm, choshech, darkness comes first. Now, Rashi, amongst others, want to suggest this wasn't actually one of the plagues, but this is in reference to the darkness as the feeling of darkness. And it wasn't actually one of the plagues, but then darkness is actually missing from this list. Again, the topic for another time. But let's go on. Hafach es mimehem ledam. Then what happened, and this is where we get really into the plagues, the waters were turned into dam, to blood. V'yomes es degasam. And all the fish died. This is represented in the Psukim in Torah, as we shall see. Shorat arsam tzefardayim. And then what followed were these frogs that took over the land, even ended up into the Chadrei Malacheihem, even they landed up into the bedrooms, the rooms, the palaces of the kings, i.e. into Paro. Pharaoh had frogs all over him. And then we'll go through Arov, Kidim, Bara, okay, it's all there, right? Now, the way it's presented here, just in this kapitel, just in this psalm specifically, and it's important that we understand this. Dam comes first. What happens with dam? What happens with blood? V'yomes es degasam. The fish all died. And we know what happened. The blood in the Nile, and not just the Nile, all the waters in Egypt turned everything, and the Psukim say they stank, and it was disgusting. They couldn't even go near the water they wanted to throw up. And the fish dying, what's the fish dying relevant? What does this represent? How do we understand this? Mefarashim want to explain that what was the source of life for the people in Egypt at that time? It was the Nile. The Nile not just gave them their source of water, but it also gave them beautiful land and crops. It made the ground fertile. They could grow the most beautiful fruits and vegetables. They could sustain themselves. Egypt represented something that Israel, the land of Canaan, didn't have. And Canaan falls into famine several times in history where Egypt doesn't, because the land of Israel, Canaan, is dependent on God. Dependent, there is no real, aside from the Kinneret and some of the water that's around it, the land of Israel is much more reliant on the rains than it is of having its own natural resources to produce the goods that it needs to produce, and to drink and to be able to feed and to allow the people to drink water. Egypt has that. You take it away, and then Egypt has nothing. It's amazing if you think about Lot and Abraham. Abraham and Lot go into Egypt. They've left the land of Canaan. They left the land of Israel. They go to Egypt. They do very well for themselves. They become quite wealthy, very rich. They amass a load of cattle, a lot of products, and they leave Egypt eventually. They go back to Israel. Things are becoming quite tense between them, whether it's their servants, their farmers, whatever it might be, their family issues. And Abraham confronts Lot and he says, you know what, you pick, you want to go this way or that way, and I'll go the other way. And what do the Pesukim tell us? That Lot looks down, then which way does he go? He goes towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, what was appealing to them? He looks down into the valley and he sees the most beautiful, fertile land. And he thinks, oh, that looks like Egypt. And he wants to go into Egypt. He wants to go into a land that looks like it can self-sustain itself. Whereas the land of Israel, it's a land of faith. It's a land of a connection between its creator and its people. God and the Jewish people. God relies on us to work the land. We rely on God to sustain us by allowing us and the land to grow and to produce. That's the big difference. The Nile and Egypt were Egypt was reliant so much on the Nile and the water and everything that when it turned to blood, life could now cease. And this was a major, not upheaval, this was life-threatening for the Egyptians. And then that clears up. And what comes next? Some frogs that went into the rooms of the kings, that covered the lands. Rashi says, Am Rabbi Yechanan, at the bottom of our page, bottom of our screen here, B'kol makoim asher roitzim mayim, Wherever there was water, that's where the frogs would be. Okay, does that sound as bad as the blood? So you've got this tremendous blood plague that is devastating. Life stops, life is bad. And then you've got the frogs. The frogs don't seem so bad here. Now, those that want to discuss frogs and why it's worse, but the way it's presented here, I would argue that it doesn't seem to necessarily be a progression in how bad things got. Now, let's keep going. Just 1 second. Just bear with me 1 second. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I apologize. Let's go back. Here we go. So that's in Psalm 78 in Kapitel Ein Ches. Again, they are represented. They are represented in a slightly different way. Yahpoich ledam yorehem. Sorry. So the rivers or the waters turned to blood, and they became undrinkable. Shalach behem, and what comes next? Arov, the death of the wild beast. So then frogs seems to either follow Arov or become a part of Arov or are somehow included in Arov, but not their own thing. So again, I've just seen the time. Where does the time go when we're having fun, right? But so that's just throwing me a little bit. I want to go through this a little bit more, but let's just go into Psukim, right? Either way, what are we left with at this point? That firstly, the way it seems to be presented, either Tzfardea is less important, and it's kind of not even its own makkah, at least it's presented just there. Again, we didn't have time to go through that properly. Or at least how it's presented in that first source that we saw is, again, and this is the way I'm presenting it, you can, b'kavod, b'vakasha, you can read it differently, read it how you like, but it doesn't seem to be as bad. And therefore, why is everything happening in this order? And for these reasons. And to do so, to really get our teeth into this, I'm actually going to whiz by this in English. This is the story. This is where the plague starts. Follow along. Let's just run through, and please God, we'll have time just to finish everything I want to do. And the Lord said to Moshe and Parai, Parai is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Parai in the morning, as he is coming out of the water, and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turned into a snake. Now, we haven't covered this here, but you'll remember the very famous, or the infamous, Chartumim, the magicians of Egypt. And when Parai has already been met by Moshe and Aaron, and Moshe wanting to prove his worth, proving the power of God, will take his staff, he'll throw it down, it will turn into a snake, and then the Chartumim, these magicians, will then take their staffs and they become snakes as well. But then what happens? The Midrash says it's a nes b'seich nes, that Moshe's snake eats their snakes. Okay, but say that these Chartumim have already come up, right? So what happens? Take with you the rod that turned into a snake, and say to Parai, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to say to you, let my people go and that they may worship me in the wilderness. But you, Parai, have paid no heed until now. Thus says the Lord, by this shall you know that I am the Lord. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile with the rod that is in my hand, and it will be turned into blood. And the fish of the Nile will die. We explained this already. The Nile will stink so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile. And the Lord said to Moshe, say to Aaron, take your rod, hold out your arm over the waters of Egypt, its rivers, its canals, its ponds, all its bodies of water, that they may turn into blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in the vessels of wood and stone. Moshe and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded. He lifted up the rod and struck the water in the Nile on the sight of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and all the water of the Nile was turned into blood, and the fish of the Nile died. By the way, we're not going to be able to cover it now because we literally have 10 minutes to go. Oh, the time. So much to learn, so much to talk about. But Aaron is the one that takes his staff and not Moshe. So why is this? Now, there are those that would like to understand that Moshe and Aaron were equal in their shlichus, equal in their agency, in their role here to be the leaders. Rashi brings out a beautiful idea of hakarat tov, that Moshe had immense appreciation. Hakarot, he was makir, he recognized the good of the water that saved him as a little baby in the Nile. He couldn't strike that water that looked after him, so therefore Aaron was the one to do so. Again, not our topic for now, just nice to understand it. That's why Aaron was the one to throw his staff into the water. The Nile stank so that the Egyptians could not drink the water from the Nile, and there was blood throughout the land of Egypt. Then the Egyptian magicians, the Khartoumim, did the same with their spells. Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. And Pharaoh turned and went into his palace, paying no regard even to this. And all the Egyptians had to dig around the Nile to get drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the Nile. And when 7 days had passed, 7 long days had passed, after God had struck the Nile, the Lord said to Moshe, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go and they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, then I will plague your whole country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace and your bedchamber and your bed, the houses of quarters and your people, your ovens and your kneading bowls. That's very, very specific information, your ovens and your kneading bowls. If we've got a minute or two at the end, maybe we can try and understand that as well. So we see that that's basically plague 1, blood, pretty bad. Plague 2, just starting. Plague 2 continues. Let's go forward. And the Lord said to Moshe, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod of the rivers, the canals and the ponds, and bring out the frogs of the land of Egypt. Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians, these Khartoumim, did the same thing with their spells and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh summoned Moshe and Aaron and said, plead with the Lord to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice the Lord. And Moshe said to Pharaoh, you may have this triumph over me, meaning, come on, just say, Pharaoh, just say you're willing to give in. You can win now. For what time shall I plead on behalf of you, of your courtiers and your people, for the frogs to be cut off from your houses, so to remain only in the Nile? They shouldn't be in the land, they should only be in the water. By the way, if everything died in the Nile, where the frogs come from? For tomorrow, he replied. This is meaning that Pharaoh says, yeah, I want them all gone tomorrow. And Moses said, as you say, that you may know that there is none like the Lord our God. The frogs shall retreat from you and your courtiers and your people. They shall remain only in the Nile. Then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to the Lord. Okay, Peseda, what happens is the next day, the frogs disappear. They die. They stank as well, just a bit like the blood. They piled them up in heaps till the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn. He would not heed them as the Lord had spoken. So what I want to bring out in the last 5 minutes that we have, so many more things I wanted to cover, and but let's just stick with where we are for the moment. First things first, the Khartoumim, and this is an important factor. And again, hopefully, I'm just giving you loads of questions that you can go and do your own research and try and really understand. Moshe and Aaron on one side, you have. And with God, obviously, who they represent. Then you've got Pharaoh, who is probably for himself considering himself like, okay, it's me and God up here. And let me just, let's not use that Rashi now. So you've got me and God up here, says Pharaoh, and you've got my Khartoumim and Moshe and Aaron down here, right? They're on their level, we're on our level. Why would Pharaoh not ask his Khartoumim to stop everything that's happening? Meaning, here comes Moshe and Aaron, and they turn the Nile into blood. And then here comes the Khartoumim, the magicians, and they turn water into blood. If I'm Pharaoh, I would say to my Khartoumim, to my magicians, stop the blood. Don't make more blood. Then the frogs come along, and Moshe and Aaron bring frogs, and the Khartoumim make frogs. I would say to the Khartoumim, the magicians, don't make more frogs. Stop the frogs. Why is it the Khartoumim couldn't stop? Why is it that Pharaoh didn't even ask them to stop? Again, it's an important question. I think it's linked into everything I want to say. Now, we did that very quickly, and you can get the sources and you can download them and you can read it again slowly, or you can just look up in the Chumash. I only really brought you what the text that's there. What are the similarities and differences between the dam, the blood, and the frogs? And then let us suggest why there's an order to this. So firstly, let us understand it as follows. Number one, they all stunk, right? Dead frogs, the blood. This is a similarity. Another similarity is the Khartoumim, the sorcerers, the magicians. In neither case did Pharaoh ask them to stop the makkah, stop the plague. They were kind of asked or encouraged to try and mirror what was copying what was happening, and they did. They managed to do so. Also, timing is an interesting, they differ in their timing, but we can maybe use this as an understanding that timing is very, very important. The blood was 7 days and was specifically told 7 days. The frogs was only 1 day. right? It was the next day that Moshe, on behalf of Egypt, Paro in Egypt, asked that the frogs would stop and die, and they did. It was the next day. So we have 7 days versus 1 day. Now, what is missing here from the dumb, actually, no, I haven't got time to go through that. So this is what I want to suggest. This is how I would like to suggest the order and why. The plagues really can be looked in two ways. They were the naturally occurring plagues and then the miraculous plagues. The Nile turning to blood was miraculous. This was ma'ala min hateva. This was above nature. If you take a cup of water and you turn it, you take its essence and totally change its essence and turn that into blood, this is miraculous. This is something that happens above nature. Some of the makot, some of the plagues were nature. The locusts swarming in, the frogs jumping everywhere. Okay, there were many of them. But you could say, this is just nature happening. Aye. But when it came to the frogs, and when it came to the others that were just nature themselves working, what made them miraculous? What made them special? What made them into a makkah, a plague worthy of God to afflict on the nations of the world? It was Moshe Rabbeinu. It was Moses and Aaron saying now, when, how, and making them stop. This was God's showing total control over time. This was life coming after death. Dumb. It's miraculous. Nature stops. It's almost obvious. They lived in a land of gods. Paro was a god. He could make things happen. He was powerful. He could get his magicians to do things that were sorcery. So blood comes along and the people just saw this is witchcraft. This is sorcery. But all of a sudden, from the death, God does something that the Khartoumim, the magicians, the sorcerers could never do. He stopped the death and created life. The waters turned back into water. And from the waters came the frogs. And not just came the frogs, came them when they were told to come, and left and stopped when they were told to die, when they were told to leave. This is something that the Khartoumim not only couldn't do, Paro couldn't even ask them to do it. And this is the double expression of each makkah. Each plague came as a punishment, but it also came as a lesson. And what's the lesson? What's truly the lesson in the progression of blood to frogs? God is in total control. That life and nature happens at the end of his fingertips. That nothing can happen, nothing can be sustained without God, who breathes life into us, into the world, who continually creates the world. And that's why, yes, maybe if we look at the severity of bloods, as we did, and how it was presented, and how everything died, and Egypt being the Nile being the source of all life and creation in Egypt. And if that goes, then everything else goes. And what could possibly follow that? How could frogs follow that? It's not necessarily how serious and severe the makkah is, but it's the lesson, it's the learning tool for Bnei Yisrael. As a people that were about to leave Egypt, to leave slavery and walk those long steps to freedom, that long path of 40 years in the desert, but to get Torah, to embrace Torah and prepare themselves to be a nation to go into the land of Israel, they would have to realize, without having really had that connection with God, God is in control. God is totally in control of everything that goes on in life. So from that death, from that destruction of the bloods, life comes. And it comes at the time in which God says it should come. And that is something that no one else could mirror. No one else could replicate. No one else could even conceive of being able to attempt, because that could only be God. Again, we haven't got time to continue going through all the makot, going through all the going through all the plagues, as there were slaves in Egypt. But what I want to show you here is that each one, why 10 we asked at the beginning? Because each one of the 10 had to be there to afflict punishment on the Mitzrayim, on the Egyptians, but each one there also had to be there as a learning tool for Bnei Yisrael. What the rest mean, I leave that for you to try and break your teeth over. Be'ezrat Hashem, it should all be with blessing, and all this affliction that they would have in the world in those days, and all the lessons that we try and learn from these holy scriptures, these holy words, these texts, these powerful lessons for all of us, as we try and understand them, as we try and become the best versions of ourselves. May this be a zechus, a merit for a refuah shalema, a speedy recovery for all those that need it, for a good, happy, and healthy life that we so miss. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we should all be able to meet in person in good health very, very soon. Thank you so much for spending time. I hope it made sense. If you have any questions, you want to follow it up, please get in touch. You can get all my information from United Synagogue. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Take care. Chodesh Tov. All the very best.